Good evening, New Bethlehem Baptist Church, Baltimore, Maryland. It's good to see you. It's good to be seen. I'm thankful for this invitation by your pastor, Reverend Dr. Lisa Wea, who invited me to come and share with you on today. I am the Reverend Christopher Lee Ware. I'm an associate minister at the Luke Church in Humble, Texas, where the Reverend Dr. Timothy Sloan is our pastor. I'm a hospice chaplain for the past 5 years. I'm also a 6th semester Doctor of Ministry candidate at United Theological Seminary, where your pastor is one of my cohort mentors. I am the creator of Spiritual Wound Care, a model of identifying and tending historical spiritual wounds, and the creator and curator of Soul Wholeness, where I focus on helping people to be and be empowered, to bring to everyone they serve, everywhere they go, and to everything they do, their whole soul. And a big part of this involves self-care. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you a little bit about self-care. And I looked at the Gospels and I thought about Jesus, and Jesus is not only our Savior, he is our exemplar for many things, one being self-care. There are many times in the biblical narrative we focus on Jesus's ministry, what Jesus is doing. Jesus is preaching and teaching and serving others, is healing the sick, is raising the dead. But there are those times in many of those same biblical narratives that we cannot overlook Jesus's lived model of self-care. In John chapter 2, there was a wedding at Cana. If you look at that story, one could say Jesus was practicing self-care. Matthew chapter 9, verse 11, Jesus was eating with the tax collectors and the sinners. If you look deeply at this text, one could say Jesus was practicing self-care. John chapter 4, verse 7, he's requesting water because he is parched and weary from a woman at a well. This could be seen as an attempt of self-care. You see, self-care is not the absence of doing. Self-care is being that can include doing, that allows one to pour out or to be poured into for the purposes of self and not service. So many times we get depleted and we are looking to get filled so we can do more, filled so we can serve more, but really then we're just becoming conduits of energy. But self-care is really about being poured out or poured into for the purpose of self and not for service. You see, sometimes we need a refresh. We need to receive. One of my favorite words is this Greek word that can be found so many times in the Gospels, but in Luke chapter 9, verse 6, it says, "So they departed and went through the towns preaching the gospel and healing everywhere." That word healing in the Greek is therapeo. It is where we get the English word translated therapy. The disciples were sent and they were preaching the gospel and healing. They were doing therapy all over. They were refreshing people. The people were receiving something and healing was occurring. What I find interesting, though, also is in that same chapter, Luke chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, the beginning. It says, "Then Jesus, he called his 12 disciples together and gave them the power and authority over all demons to cure diseases, and sent them to preach the kingdom of God," and watch this, "and heal the sick." But this word heal is not the same Greek word that is in verse 6. This Greek word heal is iomai. It is a divine healing. Whenever you find this Greek word in the biblical narrative, it is always found in what is a divine passive. You can find no human understanding, no human action for how this healing comes about. What's interesting is that Jesus has sent them to preach, and he's given them power and authority, and he sent them to heal the sick, eomai. But what we find in verse 6, they're providing therapy. The divine eomani healing has not manifested in these activities, but they are providing a therapy. The people are receiving something. So sometimes we need to refresh. Sometimes we need to address. Sometimes there's something inside of us that we need to address, something inside of us that we may need to process or get out or purge. I love this Greek word, also found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, verse 14, that says, "So when he saw them," speaking of the 10 lepers, "he said to them, 'Go, show yourselves to the priests.' And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed." Cleansed. This Greek word, katarazao. It's this, God, I love this. It's where we get the English word catharsis, which means to release, to purge, to push out. When we cry, it can be cathartic. When we yell, it can be cathartic. We're releasing often emotional energy or physical things that are going on in our body. So when it comes to looking at self-care, there are times that we need to refresh, we need to receive. There's times that we need to address, we need to purge. But we need to look at some of the misconceptions around self-care. Just have two. One misconception I believe about self-care is that saying no is self-care. I hear that often where people they're so busy, they're doing so many things, they get into the place where they begin to feel good about telling people no when they've been asked to do things. However, denial of others' requests is more of self-protection and preservation than self-care. You see, no can be or can lead to self-care, but saying no is not inherently self-care. No is more, as I've already said, it is more often inherently self-protection and self-preservation. We're feeling overloaded, overworked, overstretched. We don't have the capacity to do all that we've been asked and that people are continuing to ask us to do. There's 24 hours in a day, but I have 36 hours worth of work and sleep and needs to get done. And my work and my ministry are spilling over into my weekends. I get no rest. I get no break. The stress is causing me to lose sleep. The sleep that I needed, I'm not even getting enough of it. And the sleep that I am getting is not of a good quality. And so I begin to tell people no. And saying no to some things may allow me to get a little more sleep, but then I do more work and I spend less time with family, and my 32 hours of work went to 26 hours of work, and I still only have 24 hours in a day because none of us have figured out how we could add any time to the day. But we begin to look at our saying no as self-care, but we're still overextended. I want to invite you to be careful to not overemphasize the block ministry of saying no as inherently self-care. It can lead to self-care, and I'll get to that. But saying no is not inherently of itself self-care. The second misconception is that if I change my external situation, it will take care of my internal needs. Dr. Weah knows that I am one who loves to deal with the soul and the connectivity between our spirit and our flesh. This misconception, I would like to also say it in this way: if I make a physical shift, it will eliminate my emotional gains. Watch out now. If I make a physical shift, it will eliminate my emotional gains. Remember, I'm saying this is a misconception, because what we're saying is a situation of life has already occurred, or situations of life have already occurred. I've already gained the emotional responsiveness to the situations. And if I shift myself physically, I leave work and go home, or leave a situation with people and go somewhere, it does not automatically eliminate the emotions. I may find other things to distract and go into the distraction ministry. I may go into the ignoring of my own emotional being ministry. But a physical shift does not eliminate my emotional gains. I like to think of a roofer on a roof with a nail gun, and they're roofing, and they mistakenly shoot that nail into their foot. Now, they can pull the nail out, which has changed the situation, but they still have an internal situation that needs addressing. So even once our situations change, there is externally, there is an internal situation that requires our attention. If you've ever been in the hospital, maybe not in this situation. If you have, you might not recall it. I worked in the hospital and in the emergency room, and what they call the shock rooms, when they bring in the trauma cases. When they place the patient on the table, there was a process that begins with the staff. There is an inventory, an intentionality, and an introspective focus that I'm going to pull out of that physical environment and invite us to look at it as our path towards self-care. Because they will tell you, the police will bring somebody in and say, I have a gunshot victim, one gunshot wound to the abdomen. They don't just begin to immediately working on the abdomen. No, no, no. They hear that information, but they begin to look at and inventory the entirety of this patient. Are there any other wounds? Are there any other scratches? Was there an exit wound from the entry wound? Because depending on if there was an exit wound from the entry wound will tell them what kind of damage may have happened internally. And if there's no exit wound from the internal wound, that tells them what may be going on internally, because they're not just worried about what they can see. They're trying to gain information and assess that which they cannot see on the inside. They begin with an inventory, and then every action that they take or inaction that they take is intentional, and it's introspectively focused on that patient. We have to begin with inventorying our own self. When I say no, when you say no to things and we gain back time, we have to begin to inventory our own emotional being so that we can begin to identify through the inventory deeper personal needs of our own. So the inventory begins with, how am I just feeling as a human being? Just how do I feel? Not about any particular situation of life, but as I just look at myself internally, as I just sit with myself and begin to inventory my being. What am I feeling, and what do I sense are my needs? So that from that inventory, I can then begin to take intentional action or inaction with an introspective focus. Remember, I'm not trying to receive in self-care simply to serve. In self-care, I am receiving or releasing for the intentional purpose of self. So it doesn't matter what it is that you do or do not do when it comes to self-care. People listen to music. Saul and David had interactions when Saul was tormented, and he played him music to soothe his soul. And we know that music transcends language, it transcends culture, it even transcends your pain and your own understanding of pain. People listen to music. You may take a nap, you may walk, you may want to just lay in a hammock and have a lazy day. It doesn't matter what you do. What it is that you be intentional with your actions or your inactions based upon your inventory, so that your actions and your inactions are intentionally focused towards addressing the need. Do I need to receive something, or is there something I need to purge and process and push out? So we can do music, we can talk. I love Isaiah 1:18, where the Lord invites Israel. He says, come, let us reason together. And reason meaning to debate, to discern what is right. And I always looked at this text and I asked God, this is a unfair request of us to come and to reason with you. You know the beginning from the end. You know the answer. Why would you invite me to come and to reason with you, to have dialogue and debate about something, to figure out what's right? And God said, because I'm not inviting you to come and talk to me because I need to hear what you have to say. God said to me, I'm inviting you to come and talk to me because I need you to hear what you have to say. Ooh, I know that's not where you thought I was going. See, the power of life and death is in the tongue, not in the thought. And often we get stuck hearing things in our thoughts, and we don't talk and hear things that we would hear differently in our ear than we hear in our mind. And God invites us to come talk. Talking can be self-care. In 1 Samuel 15:11, after Saul disobeys God's command to destroy the Amalekites, God comes to Samuel, the word of the Lord comes to Samuel, and God says, I am grieved. In the NIV translation, the King James scares me. He says, it repenteth me. Whew, what did somebody have to do to make God feel like God needed to repent? But God talked about it. Self-care. God is giving us an example of how to process those things going on within us, not to just hold them in and bog them down and cast them aside, but to process them and to purge them and to empty of ourselves of those things that should not be lingering there. It's there, but it shouldn't linger there unchecked and unprocessed. Talk it out. Prayer can be self-care. Communication with, watch this, reflection on inner self and not external situation. If you read the New Testament, and I invite you to spend some time, there are those texts where Jesus, he goes away to pray continually. Mark chapter 6, verse 46, Mark chapter 1, verse 35, Luke 5:15, Luke 9:10. Jesus is pulling away to pray privately. We don't know what was in those prayers. We don't see him praying for the world publicly, but we see him stealing away, and I believe to pray and commune with God about his own being. Because we see that there are other times in the biblical narrative, in Philippians 4:6 and 1 Thessalonians 5:16 and Philippians 1:19, where we're called to pray for one another and that there is healing that is received through the prayers of one another. But self-care is about me and not external ministry. And so if I'm praying and I'm going into prayer intentionally to pray for the community and to pray for the world and to pray for the sick, I want to be careful that I'm categorizing that as self-care. That is a necessary call in our life as Christians for our ministry. But when I minister to me, when I go into prayer and I have self-care, we dialogue with God. about ourselves, to receive for ourselves, and not receive in order for us to continue to just do service. So prayer can be used as self-care. Listening can be self-care. Because see, we have to first be able to listen to ourselves. Because if I can't listen to myself and hear myself, then I don't gain a self-awareness of myself. And if I don't gain and have a self-awareness of myself, then I can't connect with other people. Because if I don't know who I am, then I don't know who's connecting with other people. And knowing who I am begins with gaining a self-awareness, which begins with an inventory, which begins with having conversations with God and God revealing to me myself in ways that I can't reveal and know myself apart from God. But I've got to listen to myself. I've got to listen to my help and my hurt. I got to listen to my hope and my heartache. I've got to listen to my pain and my promise. I've got to listen introspectively, and I've got to talk to God. Because watch this, self-care is foundational to compassion. And in our community, we desire and we want to be compassionate with one another as Christians. But it begins with self-care. The Greek word for compassion means literally inward parts. So often we look at the external actions of someone and we think we see compassion. But when somebody brings you food, it's not about the food. Anybody could have brought the food. We could have ordered delivery for the food, but it's what is coming out of you that is being received through and in this food. That's compassion. But I can't pull out of my inward parts and put it into my external actions to give the fullness of compassion if I'm not practicing self-care so that I have an awareness of my being. I've inventoried all that I am. I'm being intentional in how I'm tending to myself so I can be intentional in what I'm pouring out and giving to you. That I am introspectively looking to pull out in my external actions of ministry. So see, self-care is foundational for compassion because it begins with our inward parts. So once again, self-care is not the absence of doing. Self-care is being that can include doing, that allows one to pour out or to be poured into for the purpose of self and not service. The goal of self-care is not to stop doing. It is to tend to your being. When we change our eating habits to address weight, when we change what we are taking in from the outside, that does not automatically address our muscles, our stamina, our lung functionality, and capacity. We can change what we take in externally, but to get to true self-care, we have to tend to ourselves, focusing inwardly. One of our greatest downfalls to self-care is that we continually change our external situations, locations, vocations. However, we do not ever focus on and generate any internal supply of gratification, alleviation, or stimulation. So whatever you do or don't do for self-care, whatever your action or inaction is, begin with an inventory of your being. Ensure that your actions or your inactions are intentional and your focus for outcome is introspective. I pray that in your self-care that you receive and release, and if needed, that you discover that Iomani healing that I spoke of. That healing that don't make no sense. That healing that no one but God could do. That healing that, like that leper, will make you stop in your tracks, turn around and go and fall down and worship at the feet of the Savior. I pray this has been a blessing for you and to you, and that you be empowered with everyone you serve, everywhere you go, and in everything you do to bring your whole soul. God bless you.